Norman, welcome. I'm really pumped for this one because today we will be talking about 9/11. We'll be going into that rabbit hole. So, this is going to be really super exciting. We will be talking about the planes. We will be talking about controlled demolition. We will be talking about that airplane that ended up like crashing elsewhere, and the one that was hijacked. We will be talking about Pentagon. So, we will be covering everything. But before we go there, I wanted to know, like, who are you? What are you? Why did you start researching this? And just, yeah, I want to know about you first.
Well, I'm no nobody really special. I was always interested in conspiracy type stuff. Basically, started with the JFK, went into the whole Tartaria stuff. That pyramids might be power stations, the weird ruins, the history that we are not being told about, all the weird, wonderful stuff. And I was around about 23 when 9/11 happened. It was completely all in, unbelievable because one would not expect two planes to cause a 110-story building to turn into one big dust cloud. And with Shanksville, that was a little bit strange because when have you ever heard about the ground swallowing up an aeroplane? And then you had the plane that hit the Pentagon. Crazy day, and everybody was really shell shocked for 24 hours. And then I kind of like forgot about it. In 2005, 2006, you had these movies coming out stating no, but there was something strange with the planes, and maybe nobody died, maybe it was a big farce, and the weirdest and wackiest of conspiracy theories came around. And later on, there was a gentleman with the name of Richard Gage that came onto the scene, and he was talking about no, but he had these two cardboard cutouts, and the one was a solid building, and the other one was just the top part, and he basically put them next to each other, and he said, well, if you throw this piece down, it falls in free fall, and that's pretty much how the buildings went down. And it made sense, but how can you manage the top part to go down at free fall speed without the bottom of the building basically being taken apart? Because if you've got a section like at the top that just breaks down with normal physics, it just says that it should just go sit there and not break through the rest of the building. And then they did experiments with thermite. So thermite is an incendiary. They use it for railroad welding, underwater welding, and it makes a huge fire show and everything. And they showed how they could use that also to cut through a single beam of steel. Then I thought, okay, these guys are architects and engineers. The guys are doing an experiment showing that it can cut steel, so they must be up to something. Then a short while later, people started talking about maybe there were nukes buried underneath the towers. When they were constructed, there was a Russian guy with the name of Dmitry Kozlitsov or something weird like that. And another gentleman with the name of Heinz Palmer. And these guys were pushing nukes, and another gentleman, James Fetzer. Um, and I just thought, okay, but if there's a nuke going off, we would also see a huge flash, you would hear a huge explosion, and you will basically have radioactive fallout like we had with Chernobyl. So I wasn't really too amused with that. And then somewhere in 2012, 2013, whilst the YouTube algorithms were still friendly to conspiratorial type of videos, I stumbled upon a energy conference in the Netherlands. And during that conference, there was, because they were talking about free energy and the Nikola Tesla technologies and all of that that's being suppressed for numerous years. And then there was a lady doing a presentation on 9/11. And she basically started the presentation with stating, well, if you want to solve a crime, you go to the crime scene and you've got to first ascertain what happened before you can ascertain how it happened, before you can go into who could have done it and why. And she then said, well, I'm going to prove to you today that these buildings turned into dust before they even hit the ground. And they didn't burn up, they didn't get blown to bits or anything like that. They physically turned into dust before the steel could hit the ground. And I was like, come on, this is like really crazy. This is kooky, man. This is like out of a sci-fi movie. But I decided I'm willing to listen to any point of view and then decide for myself. So I sat through it, and by the end of it, I was gobsmacked, completely and utterly gobsmacked, because this lady was talking about not just the two towers in Building 7. She was pointing out anomalies with buildings 3, 4, 5, 6, and then an eighth building called the Bankers Trust that was initially repaired, and then they found something wrong with the metal, some sort of degrading of the metal still going on, and they had to take that building apart at the cost of something like $70 million. So why fix a building and then take it apart? And
Wait,
everything
so
just clicked.
was this on YouTube? So you're watching this on
Yeah,
YouTube at home? Okay.
yes,
And is
yes,
this video still available?
yes, it is.
Oh, really? Okay. And
Yeah, it is.
she's
It
alive?
is. She's still alive. Yes. She's living the quiet life, looking after her chickens and tending her garden. And her
Mhm.
name is Dr. Judy Wood. And not just the anomalies with those buildings, but she was pointing out a whole bunch of other stuff, like the seismic readings. There was fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. There were 1,400 vehicles that she calls is toasted, meaning they look like burnt out hulls, but strange effects on the vehicles itself that you can't explain with a normal vehicle fire. And
Where
certain
were
of the
these
car,
vehicles? Where were they?
all around the World Trade Center up to 10 blocks away. So, how does a building that ends up collapsing due to jet fuel and the weakening of steel cause a whole bunch, 1,400 vehicles to have the damage that they showed?
And this evidence is like provable that about these
Yes.
vehicles.
Basically, she's a structural engineer with a huge, like 2 or 3 degrees. She's written something like 60 papers, co-authored the papers, and she ended up writing a request for correction to NIST. Now, remember, there was a big um, um, what do you call it, investigation into why the buildings collapsed. And the NIST report was a 10,000 page report brought out by the government, and they had 23 contractors doing all the research and everything. And she found mistakes in their reports. So she ended up writing a request for correction. And that in part made her a whistleblower, because the NIST was supposed to investigate the reason for the collapse, but they
Wait,
didn't do that.
wait, but she was part of this commission, investigative
No, no,
commission?
no, 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 no. She was a separate scientist
Okay.
that read their reports.
Oh.
And because of her background, she could see mistakes that they were
Hmm.
making and
Okay.
false points. And she was pointing that out. So once she submitted the request for correction, that made her a whistleblower. And that also then allowed her to sue the 23 NIST subcontractors who were tasked with writing these reports. And she also ended up going to the US Supreme Court with us. And there was another gentleman as well. His name was Dr. Morgan Reynolds, who also filed a request for correction due to the plane impact studies that were done with the Twin Towers as well, because he could point out certain anomalies there. Um, and strangely enough, if you ask architects and engineers for 9/11, all the various PUBA organizations in America about these court cases, they don't mention it. And that is very strange, because if everybody's going after truth, then why are these two um, professors being silenced, cancelled, not talked about, and basically being made out to be fools? And that basically is also very, very strange.
Has
So,
someone
and
foyed these court recordings so that people can
you
read?
you you can actually read both these professors' court cases and what they submitted to court on their websites. And
Oh,
what
cool.
Dr.
So it's
Wood ended
public.
up, yeah, and what Dr. Wood ended up doing is she put all the evidence that she filed in the court case
Hmm.
into this book.
Oh, okay. Right.
So it's
So
huge, with all her wonderful uh, pictures and questions that she's got. So it's wonderful, wonderful doc. book to work through to get your head around what happened. And if
Right.
you
Can you buy
ask
it on
people,
Amazon or somewhere? Where is it
they can buy
available?
directly off a website. It is
Okay.
wheredidthetowersgo.com.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, and if you want to look at Dr. Morgan Reynolds' work, he's on nomoregames.net. And you can also download the all the court filings and everything. Everything can be found there, and you can also see presentations and everything that was done by her and him.
Okay. All right.
So there's a
So
lot of Indian wind done.
right. So maybe let's just start with the planes.
Okay. Now there's another gentleman in the UK, and his name is Mark Conlon. His research is under the pen name 911 Planes Research. You can also find him on Substack under 911 Planes Research. And what he's uncovered through the years is when a plane crashes, there is a ELT, an electronic locator transmission, that is supposed to go off when a plane crashes. And these ELTs get tested, I think, 2 or 3 times a day. I might be a little bit wrong. I'm not as sharp on the plane technicalities as Mark. Um, but those things go off as soon as a plane crashes. It doesn't matter how fast it's flying or whatever, because it's located in the tail section of the plane. And not one ELT went off for any 4 of the planes that crashed on 9/11. Then there was other strange anomalies when he ended up looking at the official radar telemetry data and all of these kind of stuff, and the in the FIA and the guys checking the radars, they were talking about the and we're just going to focus on the 2 planes now for World Trade Center, but it's actually the same for all 4. All 4 planes were actually still in the sky and were tracked on different locations after they supposedly crashed.
But and this is also like provable that there's like
Yes,
evidence.
correct. Mark has got all the Freedom of Information Act requests. There are official declassified documents. He's got all of that on his websites and in his Substack articles available for anybody to look at.
So where were the dots showing that these 2 planes that crashed onto WTC?
Well, I don't know it off by hand, as I'm not as sharp as Mark on that, but they were around about 100 or 150 miles past where the World Trade Center was.
Oh, how miles? What is in kilometers? So is it like in a different
Two,
city or
yeah, completely different spot than
okay.
New York City. But there's other aspects that you've got to take in mind as well. Shortly after 9/11, there was a lot of pilots who were questioning the official story because, and they were under the organization called 9/11 Pilots for Truth. Now, something that you've got to remember with planes have got safe speeds at certain altitudes.
Mhm.
And this is something that people struggle with because it is impossible for a plane to fly at 500 miles per hour at sea level. The planes are constructed and built, and their engines have the power to fly at 500 miles an hour at 30,000 feet. Then the lower a plane, because the air is very thin there and the molecules are further apart. So the lower you start coming, the slower a plane must fly for the structural integrity of the plane. So that's why they've got safe speeds, like
Because of the gravity, right? So
the
gravity will be
gravity and then the aerodynamics that come into play on the planes. So
Okay.
if you go too fast with a plane at a certain height, the aerodynamic and the drag becomes too much, and then something like flutter comes in, where the wings basically start doing this, go like this,
Mm.
and then the structural integrity and the plane can then basically pieces can break off. A very good example for that was on November 12, 2001. That's 2 months and a day after 9/11. There was American Airlines plane that took off out of New York behind another plane, and when it took off, it ended up in the turbulence of the plane in front of it. And the plane was about twice the height of the Twin Towers. And what happens and what pilots are taught when you're in turbulence is you've got to work on the rudders, and that's now the back top wing on the tail, and to turn it left and right to just counter the turbulence. And what he ended up doing is he was pressing on them too hard, and he ended up breaking off the tail section. And when the tail section is off, there's no controllability of a plane. And it ended up falling out of the sky. And whilst it was falling, it obviously exceeded the safe speed under 10,000 feet. That's 240 knots or so. Let's say that's around about 300 kilometers an hour or so. And then the engines broke off. And the engines basically hit the ground before the plane hit the ground. So, what do we learn from this example? If you've got a plane flying at the towers at 500 miles per hour, what should happen to that plane if you see what happened to the plane of Flight 587 on November 12, 2001? Those planes would break up, they will break apart. And that is exactly what the pilots for 9/11 Truth and all those guys were saying. It is, number one, impossible to fly that fast, that low. And then secondly, they said that the controllability of a plane, even if it could fly that low at 500 miles an hour, and if you are coming in and you've got to hit a tower that's virtually just as wide as what your plane is, it's very difficult to hit a target at those speeds. And what they ended up doing is they put pilots in flight simulators, seasoned pilots in simulators, to try and replicate coming at, and they started them about 15 miles out from New York, and said, okay, fine. When we press play, you are flying at 500 miles an hour, and you've got to hit that tower dead in straight in the middle of it. And 9 out of 10 pilots couldn't do it in 10 tries.
So I'm thinking if you don't really care about survival, all your focus is at like making sure you hit the target, or are you
Okay,
saying
but
that they wouldn't make it because their engines would fall off before they hit
the
before
engine is physically not built to go at that speed. There are researchers that have phoned Boeing and to ask if a plane can fly that fast, that low, and they said no. There are aeronautical engineers that also are on record stating that it is impossible for a plane to keep its structural integrity. There's another pilot, he flew Flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville, and he also flew the Flight 175 that crashed in the South Tower, the second plane, prior to 9/11. And he's on record stating if it was hijackers that were taught how to fly a Cessna could not come into a 757. And even if you look at the instrument panels between a Cessna and a commercial jet, it's two different things. It's like you and I climbing out of a Fiat Punto into a F1 Formula One racing car. We won't know what button to push or how even to keep this thing in a straight line. Um, so,
what's his name?
what
What's this pilot's name?
um, Russ Winterberg,
Okay.
Wittenberg, yeah. And then you've got Ben Eady and all these gentlemen that have coined in, and you can also possibly still find some information from the pilots for 9/11 Truth. But I can also send you some videos with audio clips with them where they talk about that as well. So
Right.
that's the one aspect. Then, if you physically look at the impact dynamics, and we've got the most video of Flight 175, the second plane that hit the South Tower. And there's over around about, with Private and some of the TV guys, about 50 videos of this. And if you look at how that plane impacts the tower, it basically just went through it.
Yeah, that's the
Now,
most suspicious thing about this,
yeah,
right? A lot of people point at it because
yes.
why is there no
It's
impact
Newton's third
explosion?
law. Yeah,
What's
Newton's third
Newton's
law.
third law?
For every action, there's an equal and opposite
Reaction.
reaction. So it's
Hmm.
exactly the same. So let's say the plane is stationary in the sky and we hit it with a building. Or if we hit the plane and the plane goes into the building, obviously there's going to be crumpling and deformation. Parts are going to break off, all of that. Have you ever seen a video of, let's say, these crash tests that they do? These crash tests that they do with regards to a truck running into a solid concrete block.
Yeah, there's like a bump. There's a mold. You can
Yeah,
see
yeah, and
there's
it
some,
breaks
yeah.
up, it crumples
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of people um, tend to want to argue, okay, but there was a lot of windows, so it could just go through or anything like
Oh.
that. But
Well, it's true.
it's
If it's like glass, then maybe you can because it's glass, right? So maybe that's why. A lot of
yeah,
glass.
but remember also what you had between the glass was thick, solid steel, or not solid steel beams, but box steel. So you might have a section ripping apart and going into the building, but you're also going to have a section that's going to get against the steel and fall down. Have you ever seen pictures, and you can just Google this, planes versus birds?
Yeah, but birds leave also like a mold. How do you call it?
Yeah,
The
they
the
leave a massive
dent.
hole in, yeah, a
Yeah.
massive dent and everything.
Yes.
So that's how fragile a plane is. Even there's you can Google a video for plane landing too hard, and then the tail section of it breaks off. That's how soft. It's basically a thin little aluminium Coke can, if you want to call it that.
Mm, okay. What does it mean then for this case?
So what actually had to happen is as soon as this plane hit the building, parts of it needed to break off and fall down to the ground.
Mm.
Some of it would have gone in, but an aluminium plane, according to Newton's third law, can't just slice into a building like a hot knife through butter. It is physically impossible.
So
And in
because of
any,
the frames, the frames were made of steel. The
yes, yeah, one of the strongest load bearing aspects of the buildings were the outer outer ring or outer side of the building. And when the architects did the calculations, they basically stated that you could cut the one side of the building, you can slice everything off, just slice them all, and the one corner and the other corner, and take out numerous um, pieces on the other three remaining sides, and then the building will still have its structural integrity for winds up to 100 miles an hour or 160 kilometers an hour, and it will not affect it. That's how much damage you can inflict to that building without it being structurally unsound. And now you've got a small little aluminium plane that just disappears into the building. It's impossible. It's physically impossible. And that's where a lot of other conspiracy theories came in. The the other aspect that people try to counter the plane controllability, because there's so many pilots that have come out and said it's impossible to fly that low at that speed because the controllability will be impossible. So you've got a lot of people pushing the notion that the planes were reinforced and then remotely controlled. That is what is now being pushed by the 9/11 Truth movement.
What's the 9/11 Truth Movement?
Okay, so you've got a couple of organizations that are out there that are constantly asking for a new investigation. They do seminars, they do fundraising, and all of that. And the most active after all these years is Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And then in 2023, another organization was founded, and it's called the International Center for 9/11 Justice. Those are the two main protagonists out there currently. And they're the people that are pushing for the remote controlled planes, even though physics, aerodynamics, impact dynamics, all of that points to there could be no plane that could do those maneuvers without falling out of the sky, and never mind going into a building like a hot knife through
So
butter.
even like remote controlled one
Yeah.
couldn't have.
Yes, there's actually a paper that was written by a plane technician, if you can call it that, who's written a very detailed document stating how it would be impossible for anybody to put in systems into the plane to be able to remotely control it, because after every flight the planes are taken through maintenance, and they make sure that everything is still working correct, and there's always an incident report being filled in, and that. And he goes into great detail. I've written an article on it around about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's on my Substack, and the document is there for you to be able to download it. And he points out with the only places where such things could be put in. He's also put in how much um, what's it, electronics you need to be able to put into be able to make something like that work, and then also how easy it would be, even if something like that is being put in, how easy a pilot would be able to nullify or switch something like that off.
Okay, so then you're questioning the airplanes, whether they were airplanes. Were What are your thoughts then?
Well, there's another conspiracy theory, and this was pushed in 2006, 2007, with the two documentaries, September Clues and Loose Change, where the guys were trying to put in the idea that no planes hit the buildings, but the planes that people saw on their TV screens were CGI that was put in after the fact
Mm-hmm. Okay.
to
But
counter
weren't
that.
there witnesses on the ground who saw
Yes,
an
they were.
airplane? Oh,
Yes,
really?
the
Okay.
people, the people videoed them. There were people that saw them, heard them, and took pictures of the second plane coming in. So now you've got to ask yourself the question: if a real plane can't do those maneuvers, it would fall out of the sky if it goes too fast. Number two, the impact dynamic shows you it's something that's not solid hitting that building. What else can it be? And this is where it gets sci-fi, and this is where you lose a lot of people because they just can't wrap their heads around it.
Well, like, couldn't, first of all, like, is it documented? All these people who have seen
Yes.
or witnessed it is documented. Okay. Mm, but couldn't there have been like some sort of like a massive psychosis of people who kind of thought the same thing, because the first one was an airplane, they were told, and then they kind of, I mean, how many
But
people is
you
it? Is there?
but you've got people, over 50 videos of people in different places all over New York who videoed it. There are people
Mhm.
who are focused on the plane from over there, and they bring it in all the way to it hits the building.
Okay. So then I'm thinking, you know that recently they were like or United States, there were like
Mhm.
the people were saying, "Oh, we're seeing UFO or UAPs," and then they
Mhm.
looked like airplanes. Do you remember
Mhm.
that? It was
Yes.
circulating on X. So they were like, "Oh, we are seeing UAPs," but then if you kind of zoomed in, they were like they had the shape of airplanes.
Mm.
Do you think something
Yes.
like that?
Yeah, and there's even a lot recently on Joe Rogan, and I've seen a lot of the UFO crowd are now starting to say that maybe a lot of the UFOs that have been spotted in the skies or whatever aren't really solid objects, but they are holographic renderings in the sky,
Oh. Hmm.
and they are actually um, patents of the US Navy dating back as far as 1969 with them working on holographic technologies.
Right. I mean, it's not really unfathomable because there was a lot of
Mhm.
technology that was known and then it came out, like internet, I think they had it for a while and then they released it to the public. Wasn't it like a lot of things that were
Yeah,
like secret and then they were like gradually released to public? So
correct.
I mean, yeah, it's not really difficult to imagine that there could be some sort of like a technology, especially if it was like there was a patent in 1960s that like, and now
Yeah.
this is fast forward 2001. Okay, that's a
Mhm.
lot of time that gives them to,
Yeah,
I don't know.
especially there was a lot of technology, huge technology leap in the 1980s, where
Mhm.
guys were bringing in very new things, lasers. They were talking about, and then by the end of the 80s, 89, Ronald Reagan started the Star Wars program, where they wanted a missile defense system in the upper atmosphere to be able to take down nuclear devices and missiles during the Cold War. And they actually did a successful test in 1989 where they shot the laser up to a satellite and basically bounced it off down to the ground, and it hit its target within 2 centimeters. And that was in
Mhm.
1989. And then all of a sudden, from there, we never heard about it ever again.
Mm.
Because what the people say is it went black ops. Um, Also, in that time, there was a Canadian scientist, self taught actually, and this guy was trying to replicate the experiments of Nikola Tesla because he heard about Nikola Tesla using uh, Tesla coils, creating a static field. And when he switched on his Tesla coils, the metals just split apart. Sometimes it became as if it's like silly putty, rubbery. Sometimes it would levitate, and and sometimes it would go glow white, and you would perceive it as it's glowing white hot or red hot or anything like this. And then when you touch it, it's cold to the touch. And the Pentagon heard about this Canadian doing these experiments, and he was doing that in the late 1970s. And by 1983, they came to his lab, looked at what he was doing for 3 months, and by 1986, they set him up with a lab in Los Alamos. That's the biggest research facility for the US military, where he replicated the stuff as well. So
What's his name, you said?
his name is John Hutchinson, and the U.S. military gentleman that paid for his research in 1986 was Colonel John Alexander. I don't know if you follow the podcast of Sean Ryan.
Yes. I
Um,
don't follow, but I've
yeah,
seen
but
some.
yeah, Colonel John Alexander was on the Sean Ryan show around about 6 to 8 months, maybe 9 months ago, and he did a 5 hour um, podcast with him where he was talking about all the exotic technologies that he was in charge of. There's a
Okay.
movie with Sean Connery, men staring at goats, and that was basically based on the research that John Alexander was doing in his
Men
department.
staring at goats, like the farm
Yes,
animal? Okay.
yeah, yeah. It was a play on words because these guys were it's what's the right word if you're sitting here and you um, projecting yourself into a different place and you're looking what's going on there. I can't remember what they call it.
Teleporting?
not teleporting, but it's people who can see
Oh, remote
visions.
viewing.
Yeah, yeah,
Remote.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
all these, he was into all these esoteric, weird stuff, and he was also working on non-lethal weapons. And he basically mentioned that in 1960, the first type of laser weapon was used to basically cut off the wing of a plane mid-flight.
Ooh.
So these guys have been playing around with toys and developing certain technologies for decades that we don't know about. And it's all in the black, you can call it the black world. There's even talk in the UFO sphere that there is a secret space program. So I don't know, maybe the flat earthers aren't going to like hearing about the secret space program, but there is definitely technologies out there that they have, that they are keeping for themselves, and they are drip feeding certain technologies as they feel fit.
Okay, so then the airplanes were some sort of like a holographic thing or whatever they
Yes.
were, then what made the building to collapse if it was not airplane?
Well, it definitely wasn't jet fuel. And a solid structure like that would not disintegrate into a big dust cloud by itself. So something helped it on. And that is where there's a huge contention where you've got people stating it's bombs, thermites, nukes, and then the lesser known and the more ridiculed explanation is directed energy weapons, or a type of directed energy weapon, or free energy. And the evidence pretty much proves that some sort of exotic technology was used. That's not in the public sphere, but we all saw what it can do.
I think like I saw some videos where they are like pushing for how it could have been controlled demolition and how there
Yes.
were like bombs, explosives, like
Mm,
go like there's this crash and then there's like a cloud of dust and then
mm.
I don't know if it's like fake
That's
video,
basically,
but you could
yeah.
see bombs, explosive like going down and
Mm,
then the building collapsing.
mm. But just because it looks like a controlled demolition, does that mean it is a controlled demolition? Let me give you this example. I've got something in my hands that are the size of a basketball. It is, it's a living animal. It is soft. It's got long whiskers, a cute nose, and it's a household pet that most everybody can have if they do feel like it. What am I holding in my hand?
A cat?
No, what if I tell you it's a bunny?
Okay, sorry. All right,
But
okay.
what did I
Okay.
do? What did I do? I gave you a certain set of parameters that you need to make your assumption from. But if I told you it's got fluffy ears and it eats plants and it hops around,
Okay.
then you would
Yeah.
have been able to say that it's a bunny. And
Mhm.
that is the problem in the, if you want to call it the truther movement, because a lot of the information that people get shown only has a partial information that is being given to you.
Okay.
There's something else that people also don't do is, and this is what I've seen in the presentations that are being given to people. They are being told what happened, but they are not being shown what actually happened. And if you go look at a real building demolition, the amount of explosion sounds that you hear, it is deafening. So now imagine, and usually those buildings are only 20, 30 stories high. That's around about the highest buildings that have been taken apart with explosives. And the preparation that goes into it, because what they need to do with a controlled demolition is they've got to remove everything, that basically just the shell of the building is left. No windows, no furnishings, no electronics, no nothing. That thing is basically as if it was just kind of like started to be built now before they put in all the other stuff. And something there was the Ocean Tower. You can find the preparation on YouTube how long it took them to prepare that 31-story building for demolition. And I think it was close to just under 2 months for 31 stories. And the amount of noise it made when that building was taken down, because remember that you've got explosions going off from the bottom, and then it starts dropping. But what did we see on
Mm.
9/11? It was like you've got a sand castle that you built, a big tower like this, and then you just stomp on it on your with your foot
Oh,
from the
from
top.
above. Yeah.
Yeah, that's completely the other way around for a normal controlled demolition.
Okay, but then you're saying that there was a sort of like an advanced sort of like a technology. Maybe there
Yes.
were like advanced types of explosives that
No.
they used.
How can you use an explosion that does not explosive that makes no sound?
Well,
Nothing like
that
that exists. And if
no,
you
I
look
mean,
at the videos, if you physically look at the videos of those buildings basically being ripped apart, you just hear a rumbling. It's like a freight train coming at you. It's not loud at all. And the other aspect that was very strange, especially if you look at the North Tower, the second tower that went down, you see the building, like the outside of the building, like just peeling away from itself. And
mhm.
then for a short while, there's a short section of steel, inner steel columns of the building that's still standing, and it basically wobbles to and fro, and then it just drops down. They call that the spire, and that is the core columns. The core columns are basically as wide as a door. That's how massive that steel is, and they've calculated that spire to have been around about 900 feet high. And if you look at the spire while it's standing there like this, under its own weight for around about 2, 3, 4 seconds, it just goes zoop. And while it goes zoop, you can physically see it turning into dust.
Wait, yeah, so then it's a structural, so it's like its structure or density is changing if it's like
Yes, correct. And that's what John Hutchinson managed in his experiments, where he would take a solid iron block, put it in a static field, switch on his Tesla coils, and bombard that with microwaves, and then you would see this solid block basically twist and contort into a small little ball. Whilst that is happening, you can see what you can perceive as smoke coming out of it, which is more maybe dust. And then that block loses half of its weight. And strangely enough, when you touch it, it's cold to the touch. So no heat involved, no heat exchange. It's physically the properties and the molecules of that piece of metal just changing. And they call that transmutation. Or you can even call it alchemy, if you want to call it. And that
uh-huh.
is the changing of the structure of metals.
Okay, well, that also maybe explains that like a lot of dust. So then
Yes,
everything turned into dust. Because I think
correct.
one of the scary videos is how people are running away from like the dust that's like
Correct.
chasing people. That's
Yeah.
like a lot of dust that went into a lot of streets.
Yeah.
So
Dr.
if that,
Wood,
mhm.
yeah, Dr. Wood basically in a book stated, because if you look at that, does that look like a con, control a building going down in a controlled demolition, or is that a building turning into dust?
Yeah, that's turning into dust. Yeah.
Completely turning into dust. And everything inside of it as well. Office furniture, desks, chairs, water fountains, toilets, everything. They didn't find anything that resembled uh, in the rubble of it being an office building. They um, the firemen and the first responders basically mentioned, there's one clip where a gentleman says the biggest piece of a telephone I found was this size. So and in that each tower you would have had around about 3,000 toilets, metal toilets, or porcelain toilets even, um, all the fixtures, the doorknobs. There's another gentleman that when they were moving all the rubble away, they took it to a landfill called Fresh Kills, and they came up to this gentleman and they asked him, "What is the most interesting artifacts that you have found in the rubble?" Because they were sorting everything out and trying to look for still pieces of people so that they can identify and everything. And he said, "Well, the astounding part for me out of all of this is the lack of artifacts, because I haven't seen a doorknob, I haven't seen a door, I haven't seen anything like that. But what they did find is they found pictures that were on people's desks in a frame. They found a lot of plastic security cards, a bunch of keys, some of the elevators, little numbers that are in the elevator. They didn't find the elevators, and stuffed animals. So if you had thermite going off, because thermite gives this huge spark, and you would have had two suns in the lower Manhattan, because it was blinding you. So if there was heat involved, how could plastic cards survive? How could all that paper that was blowing everywhere survive? How could stuffed animals survive? So the event itself of the disintegration of the buildings, because it wasn't a structural failure or a collapse, and it wasn't a controlled demolition using any kinetic or thermal mechanism, but it was a disintegration on a molecular level. Because what you see when you see this building basically unraveling, and that what looks like explosions going off, because everybody gets told by Richard Gage and architects or engineers, no, but that's explosions. But go look at the audio. There are a lot of audio out there where you can go see that happening, and it's pretty quiet. It's not boom, 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 like you would see with a normal demolition. So go watch a couple of demolition videos, and then you will see. And the main thing then is when the dust cleared after these two buildings basically disintegrated, and you look down onto the ground zero, as they called it, there was remarkably a huge lack of rubble. So the main thing is, in a controlled demolition, when things get blown apart, there's a usual and average amount of debris that they expect. And our most recent example of it is the building collapse in Myanmar, Thailand. I don't know if you saw those videos clips in the last 2 weeks. And it
No.
was going viral on X. So just go look Thailand, Myanmar, building collapse or whatever. Because what happens if a building collapses? All the floors pancake on top of one another. So
Yeah.
you can physically count first floor, second floor. That didn't happen on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have a bunch of pancake floors. Then if it was blown apart, and this is what the other people say, if it was ejected laterally, then you would have a debris field of 600 feet, and there was a lot of dust, and some of the metal landed there. But when you've got a controlled demolition, the average rubble pile expected in relation to the height of the building is usually 12.5%. Now, if you do a calculation of 12.5 of 110 floors, we would expect a rubble pile of 13.75 stories high, is what the rubble pile should be like. Now, when you had the two towers, at the bottom you had small little trident-like sections that were a lot wider spaced than all the other parts of the building. And that is basically the lobby that was 3 stories high. And there's a great picture that I put on my X the day before yesterday with an ambulance that was parked in the street in front of the North Tower. And in the background, you can see the outer shell of the North Tower, and you can see the rubble pile was basically in line with the tridents, and that means the rubble pile itself was 3 stories high. And strangely enough, and this is where Dr. Wood thought, okay, maybe the people are figuring this out, because at the day she was standing there saying, no, can't happen. She went and did a research for calculations on how quickly a building is supposed to fall, and she said, well, if it was pancaking, you would have that building going down, and it would have taken around about 90 seconds. And those buildings came down in 9 or 12 seconds each. So
That's like
that's,
10 times
again,
almost quicker.
yeah, that's as fast as, but she then calculated is it's in line with you standing on the top of the Twin Tower, taking a bowling ball and dropping it. And that's how long it will take a bowling ball to hit, or a billiard ball, snooker ball to hit the ground.
When it's demolition or when it's
No,
what?
no, just a normal free fall with gravity. With gravity, if you stand on top of the Twin Tower and you drop a ball down, it will
Okay.
take about 9 to 10 seconds to hit the ground.
9 to 10 seconds. Okay.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
how the Twin Towers fall?
That's, yeah, as fast as gravity. That's how quickly those buildings dropped, which is impossible, but it did happen.
But why is it impossible again?
Because you've got a solid structure below, and what the government is trying to tell you is that top part that tipped a little bit, that is the part that crushed down like the bottom 90 stories. It's physically impossible. Because remember, Newton's third law, for every action, there's a certain equal and opposite reaction. So the bottom of the building is going to push back to this
Mm,
top. And that's where the guys are
okay.
now saying, okay, it was controlled demolition, so the bottom needed to be taken out with explosives or thermite or whatever.
Oh,
But
okay.
again, if you listen to the audio, there isn't enough sounds for explosives. And then also, if it was thermite, because they calculated that to take down the towers, then you had to have 29 cubic tons of thermite in the buildings to be able to sever columns so that it can drop. But again, if you go watch any thermite experiment, they usually take about the amount of a coffee cup of thermite. And then look at the massive fire show and the hissing and the spitting and everything that happens. And we didn't
Mm,
see any bright flashes when those buildings were coming down.
mm. So it's
And then,
messy. So with termites,
yeah,
it would be too messy. And
correct.
and then the okay, so there was no fire. I mean, that's obvious. There was no fire because fire could explain how, some things can burn and turn into ash and you
Mm,
will not see any trace of them. So
yeah.
burning can explain. But the fact that the big things that are just disappeared, even if it's a collapse, even if it's something collapsing, you would have like a mass
Things like
of it.
crushing each other and then sitting
Yeah,
strange
like
or
a
anything like that. Nothing of that happened. That thing just went.
mhm.
And again, I'll give you the example of go next time you're at the beach, build up a huge little tower out of sand and then just stomp on it with your foot. And that's pretty much what happened. Except that thing was just peeling itself open. Then you had a section where you can see the inner core still standing, and then that also just dropped down. And
Right. Yeah. So because
and
if
the
it's like a
crazy part,
mhm.
the crazy part is underneath this spire section that you had that just dropped down like that. 16 people survived.
Oh, okay.
They weren't
Okay.
crushed. They weren't
Hmm.
hit by falling debris. They weren't burned. They didn't go deaf of loud explosions. They didn't go blind from bright flashes going off. And they didn't die of radiation poisoning if a nuke went off. They basically walked out of there. And the one man that they call him the miracle man or the 9/11 surfer. And you can find interviews with him on YouTube. His name is, and I'm going to get the Italian name wrong, but it's Pasquale Buscelli. This gentleman was coming down from the 84th floor um, in stairwell B, and that's where these survivors survived. And he was coming down, and they ended up meeting up with some firemen that were coming up to fight the fire. And they said, well, if you get down to the 23rd floor, there's an elevator working, and you can then just jump in the elevator for the last bit. And he said, okay, yeah, maybe we'll do that. And when they still and they were around about in the 46th floor when they met up with these firemen, and he can still remember he went past floor 23, and when they got to the 22nd floor, that's when a huge rumbling and the building started to shake, and the ladies and part of his co-workers decided to run into the 22nd floor, and he was halfway down the ledge in the stairwell, and he just jumped to a platform in the stairwell, and he ended up crouching into a small little ball. And what he then says is, the next moment he's just falling through the air, and came to a hit whilst he was falling. Debris was hitting him and all of this kind of stuff, and he kind of came to, and then when he looked up, there was blue sky above him. You had
Wow.
110-story building, 80 stories above you, 500,000-ton building, and now you're looking up at the sun. Where did that building go? And this is what's so freaky for people to realize. And even there's another firefighter, his name is Mickey Cross. He's talked about this quite often because he was on the second or the third floor when it happened. And he mentions that whilst this shaking and everything was going on, there was a huge rush of air going up the stairwell, and he could feel his helmet basically wanting to float off his head, and he had to catch it and then crouch into the corner as well. And he just said, well, if we're going to die, let's just hope it's quick. And then obviously it went dark, and then a short while later he also said, well, there was a 110-story building above us, and all of a sudden there's now sun peering through this darkened area where they were in the stairwell. And he thought, well, we're going to be buried underneath 110 stories worth of rubble. The guys are most probably never going to be able to get to us in time, and we're going to lie here and die in the next 2 weeks whilst they're still looking for us. And strangely enough, the 16 survivors were helped out of there. Pascal had a broken ankle, and he was back home that night, 8 o'clock, to his pregnant wife. So, and that also does not get spoken about in the 9/11 truther areas, and people have forgotten about this. There's actually a documentary that was made about these survivors, and it's called The Miracle of Stairwell B, where these firemen and these first responders give their testimonies of what they went through whilst they were trapped there. The other firemen basically stated when they came to and everything started quieting down and the radio started working, and he was calling out, telling the guys where they are. I can't remember the fire engine, what they were, but fire engine, this, North Tower, Stairwell B, North Tower, Stairwell B, this is where we are. And eventually the guy, over the radios, the guys were saying, where is the North Tower? And then he knew that they were in trouble. Something very weird has happened. Because they didn't even know at that stage, because they were in the North Tower, they didn't even know the South Tower went down. And when these guys came out of here, and you've seen the pictures of the rubble pile and the dust everywhere, it looked like they were in some sort of sci-fi movie. Imagine, go to your local city and find out which one is the tallest building in your city, and go stand next to it. And then in Cape Town, for me, I think the highest one is something like 30 stories. And if you stand next to that building, and you imagine this 30-story building, but it was 3 times as high, and now all of a sudden it's level to the ground, and the rubble of the building isn't even 3 stories high.
Yeah. So then it is something that John Hutchinson came up with. It's some sort of like a field that you create that will turn metal into
We
dust.
can only speculate on what the serial number of the weapon is. But in Dr. Wood's court case, John Hutchinson wrote an affidavit where he basically stated that all the evidence with the strange toasted cars, the anomalous fires that broke out on the vehicles, and a lot of other stuff is a lot like what he's dubbed the Hutchinson effect, but what happened to the World Trade Center must be some sort of scaled up version of the technology that he was working on.
Mm. In the beginning, you mentioned something about the seismic thing. What was that
Yes.
about?
Yeah. Now, the main thing is if you imagine those two buildings were 500,000 tons each, and if you drop 20 tons that high and it falls onto the ground, it's going to make a sound, it's going to make a bang. And you can then pick up that bang um, on the Richter scale. The same with when the guys are busy at the rock quarries and they're doing explosions. There, sometimes if you're close by it, you can feel the ground shaking. Now, that's what's supposed to happen on 9/11. Now, the seismic readings that were taken for the buildings was not in line with that of two 500,000 ton buildings hitting the ground. Because the way
Oh,
that a Richter scale works is that there are two initial. You get a primary wave that comes in, and then you get the secondary wave, and then you've got the whole shaking happen. Now, the shaking and everything for the two buildings, I think, was also 8 or 9 seconds. That's very, very short. But the um, the Richter scale readings for the two towers was a 2.1 and a
okay.
2.3. Now,
Wait,
what
so
Dr. Witt,
for both of them, so when they measured for that
mm,
day and time, the what did you call Richter?
yeah,
Is it the measurement?
the measurement for the one building was a 2.3, and the other
Okay.
one was a 2.1. And
Okay.
now
And
what Dr. Wood did is she ended up um, looking at the Seattle Kingdom. That was a 20-story stadium, concrete stadium, that was blown up in a controlled demolition. And
mhm.
that registered a 2.3.
Okay.
Then in 2023, there was a Taylor Swift concert where a bunch of people jumped up and down, and that registered a 2.3 as well. Now for the two 500,000 ton, sorry, and the Kingdom only weighed 130,000 tons.
So what percentage of is this the kingdom is of one twin tower?
So I don't know the percentage, but
Approximately.
the expected seismic readings that we should have taken for the 500,000 ton buildings should have been between a 3 and a 4 on the Richter scale. So the seismic readings is another indication that the weight of the building never hit the ground. And then, strangely enough, with the Richter scale readings, there was no P or S wave. No primary wave, no secondary wave. The only waves that were registered were surface waves. Now, the way to explain a surface wave is like a old school mattress with springs. So let's say there's two people on the mattress and the one person gets up, you can feel that disturbance. You can feel that weight coming off the mattress. And that's what was basically registered with the Twin Towers. It's as if all of a sudden 500,000 tons was just lifted away. And that's caused the surface disturbance. And that's the waves that were recorded.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So
And
for
yes,
if there was, let's say, a collapse or like a lot of people jumping up and
yeah,
down, then you would have three waves. But in this case, there was only one wave, and it
yeah.
felt like they took away the
I'm just going to
whole
close this.
weight of the building.
Yeah, yeah. So you basically just had the surface waves, no S or P waves, and that is a major anomaly, which even the 9/11 truth movement, if you ask them about that, they just go in a flutter because they can't explain that. And with a
Mhm.
controlled demolition, you would have an S and a P wave registered for the explosion in the bedroom.
Okay, so then we can speculate that there is this technology that we don't know what exactly or how exactly it works, but it's something that similar John Hutchinson came up with some sort
Yeah,
of like a field that creates some sort of like waves and turns like steel and metal into
dematerializes everything
dust. Okay.
on a molecular level. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
scary, very, very
Hmm.
scary.
So then let's say, so this is like a military, right? So are we assuming that US military possesses this technology?
Good that you mentioned that, because there were two companies that were kind of in charge of ground zero operations, and they also wrote reports that made up the initial NIST report that the government brought out. And these were, and two of the 23 subcontractors who wrote these reports were ARA, uh, Applied Research Associates, and SRAIC. Um, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but they were in charge of security and cleanup at Ground Zero.
Hmm.
And military contractors that specialize in um, psychological operations, impact studies, weather manipulation, and also directed energy weapons. So who would be a prime contractor to come investigate the destruction of a building? Military contractors that specialize in psychological operations, because something that happened on September 12th is people were asking questions of why is there so little rubble? And the explanation was given, well, everything fell down and evaporated.
Okay, what that's makes why would
Because
somebody say
remember, yes, because remember, people in general are simple beings. Something very, very bad has happened. I want to know what happened, and I just give you an answer. And the first answer that I give you is what's going to stick. And
no,
that's what
but
the
wait,
people were
like if
told.
somebody said evaporated, you would ask more questions. The word evaporated, maybe in English it means something else, but if somebody said that in my native language, evaporated, I'd be like, that makes no sense.
Well, remember, 9/11 was a major, major traumatic event. Number one, you don't expect a plane to melt into a building like a hot knife through butter. That's the first anomaly. Number two, you don't expect that kind of destruction after a plane hit a building. So everybody's like, what the hell is going on? And then you give them a quick answer and then say, oh, okay, sort it out. Because you just didn't have just what happened at the World Trade Center. You had the plane crashing in Shanksville. That was apparently taken over by the passengers. The hero aspect in the whole illusion of the day, and then you had the Pentagon as well. So there was a majorly um, traumatic event. One could call it a, um, a an attack on human consciousness. What happened? Because people just stopped thinking rationally. Because even before they realized what happened, everybody was talking about it's Osama bin Laden. It's Osama bin Laden. We've got to go kill somebody. And
Yeah.
that story was actually planted on the news. I think it was 45 seconds after the second plane hit. The guy on the TV said, "Well, the only person who can be responsible for something like this is Osama bin Laden."
Yeah,
And
I
then everybody was
remember.
just running Osama, 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 Osama.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden they told you who did it, and they told you what happened. They told you it collapsed. Sorry, but after all these years, if you really look at it, it's not a collapse. It's not a controlled demolition. And then all of a sudden, everybody, and that's how quickly this trauma based mind control kicked in. And I don't know how well you know the narratives, but there was this gentleman, they call him the Harley shirt guy. And he was a independent reporter for the Fox News. And he was being interviewed, I think it was just after the second tower collapsed. And he's the first guy that solved 9/11, because he said the reason the buildings collapsed is the planes, too much heat, the metal in the building got compromised, and that's why it happened. And that's where the jet fuel melt steel beam story started. And that was implanted to the people even before, just after the second tower fell. So that's where people's minds already switched off. The buildings fell because of the intense heat. And then the next day, when people were asking the questions of why is there so little rubble, well, it fell down and it evaporated. Okay, I've got my answer. I don't have to be scared anymore, because we are now going to go kill all the guys there in the Middle East.
It just sounds okay. All right. So what then I remember after that there were a lot of people, especially young men, that were feeling really patriotic, and they were okay,
Mm,
we're going to go and protect our land. There was a massive movement to go and
yes,
fight and defend the United States. It was very
yes.
patriotic. Everybody became
Mm.
united, and they were going to fight Osama bin Laden and chase him down in the mountains of Afghanistan or somewhere else. So
And
then
it took over 10
are we
years.
assuming that this was done to, I'm thinking like there was like a lot of things that they probably, if we're saying this is some part of the military of the United States, or maybe like whatever. So this
Mm.
organization that possesses this technology, and I'm assuming they kind of wanted the war to start, and they needed to kind of you to what is it, one with one bullet, two rabbits? Is it how you say
Uh,
it?
uh, yeah, one stone, two birds, or something like that. Yeah. Look,
Okay.
remember, I'm also English second language, so I also
Okay.
struggle with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
So
but
they wanted
also
to
there's
test their technology, right? I mean, how else could have they tested this technology in a massive scale? Or do you think
there's
they were not testing it?
they were testing it for a very long time, because in 1985 there was a gentleman with the name of Lieutenant Colonel Tom E. Bearden, who went onto CNN, and they did a whole special on RF weaponry, radio frequency weaponry, scalar waves, and all of that kind of stuff. That dates back to Nikola Tesla again. And they were talking about mind control and all of that with radio waves, the woodpecker, the Havana syndrome type stuff. And he was showing satellite pictures in the special of the Soviets testing some sort of RF weapon that was dustifying buildings. And that's satellite pictures from 1977 that he was discussing in 1985. And he said that if you intersect these beams, you can create what seems to be a cold nuclear explosion without radiation, or you can extract energy from a distant point. And he was doing a lot of research in that respect. And at the same time, in 2006, there was a gentleman with the name of Dean Warwick, I think from Scotland, and he used to be MI5, MI6, something like that. And he was talking about on a radio show about what his grandfather basically saw in 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 the late 1950s, where the Russians, the Americans, and the British were busy testing weapons that were dustifying buildings of 25 stories. And he also
Okay.
mentioned the fact that when he saw, because for a long time they didn't really show the second plane impact. Um, and when they eventually started showing that, he said that is not a solid plane that hit the building. And then, but a lot of people will say, oh, no, but it was a real plane because they found an engine in Murray Street and they found landing gear. Problem with that engine is it wasn't the type of engine that American airline planes come out with. So it was a staged engine that was dropped off there. They dropped off the wrong type of engine. I, I might be getting them switched around. It's either Pratt and Whitney or Rolls Royce. So I think yeah. So let's say under correction, let's say they came out with Rolls Royce engines for the whole fleet, because that's what they used. But they dropped off a Pratt and Whitney engine at Murray Street. And then to tie into the queries with regards to the plane parts that you have seen pictures of at the World Trade Center, that you have seen at Shanksville, and that you have seen at the Pentagon. Usually, what happens when they do when a plane crashes, they can, if all the parts have got serial numbers on them, which you can then trace, and is part of your investigation. So you can then prove that this part here belongs to that plane, but there is no such records available. Freedom of Information Act requests have the NTSB, the National Transport Bureau, all the guys that do the flight crash investigations have been asked to get Freedom of Information Acts, and they cannot trace one serial number to one of the planes. No such records exist.
You also mentioned that those airplanes were elsewhere and they were
Yes,
beeping on monitors
yeah,
right after the crash. So
correct.
then were they able to track them down where they landed?
Unfortunately not, and that is one of the contentious issues. There's a lot of speculation about where they've gone. There was a army colonel, can't remember what his name is now, but he was a well-known Satanist in the U.S. Army. He was the priest of the Temple of Set or something, and he was also part of the psychological operations of the U.S. military. And he made the statement that it went to one or other air base, and that is where the people were taken to do the fake calls and then gotten rid of. There is a video of Debbie Walsh. She was the purser on flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville. Her husband has officially stated that he does not believe the government official story that that plane crashed at Shanksville. Even the FBI people that arrived there first on the FBI website states, well, when we arrived there, there was no indication that a plane has crashed there. Even the mayor of Shanksville says that when we got here, you couldn't tell that a plane had crashed here. So there's a lot of inconsistencies of the government actually being able to prove that any plane crashed at any of the said um, locations.
Right. So this is like a massive operation, and it feels
Yeah,
like a lot of people were involved one way or the other. Somebody had to drop off the engine somewhere, somebody had to make sure that the airplane's going somewhere else and getting rid of the people, getting people to
yeah,
call their loved ones and
yeah,
from the airplanes, and it's a massive operation.
yeah. And this is
Um
why you can really get sucked into so many little talking points and argumentative places on various subjects on the bigger scheme of things. It is so big for people that you don't know where to start and and what to really argue, because you can go in circles for days. You can um, just on the I've done a presentation on building 7 alone that was 3 hours long. Then I've done a presentation on the disinformation agents that is 4.5 hours long. Then I've done one on the Twin Towers and all the various anomalies there. That was 5 hours long. That's how in depth and how many rabbit holes there are that you can go into. This is why it's so big. There are so many layers to this onion, which is 9/11. It is, and people just don't want to take the time and do the research. So if you want a shortcut, read this book to know what happened at the World Trade Center. And if you want an overarching summary of all three sites, there's a very, very, very well researched documentary called 9/11 Alchemy Facing Reality. It's 3 hours long. And that takes you through all the technologies and stuff that's possibly being used on the World Trade Center with regards to the weird and wonderful planes, the strange anomalies at the Pentagon, and then also with Shanksville. I call it your crash course to 9/11 as a start, but for a very good in-depth understanding of what exactly happened at the World Trade Center that cannot be explained by a structural collapse or a controlled demolition or by a nuke is Dr. Wood's 2.5 hour presentation that she did in 2012. And that is basically what just blew my mind. Because
Mhm.
once again, getting back to our seismic readings, even when all of that weight fell down, you are well aware of how dikes work in the Netherlands to keep the water out from a certain area, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, so with the World Trade Center, that complex, or Manhattan itself, is a small little island in the middle of the major Hudson River.
Yeah, it
So if
was
you
by
start,
the river, right? The
yeah,
buildings were
yes,
very close to the river.
correct. So what they had to do in order to stabilize a building of 500,000 tons that they were going to be building is they had to dig down around about 7 stories to the solid bedrock. And well, obviously, if you're next to a river and you try and dig a hole, you got water coming in the whole time. So they had to build a dike around the World Trade Center complex. And they call that retaining wall the bathtub. Now, if you have two 500,000 ton buildings, and then later on also building 7 that was 230,000 tons, all falling down onto the ground into the sub basements that are 7 stories deep, then you are going to rupture the bathtub. And when that happens, that basically has water coming in into the subway tunnels that all came into the World Trade Center sub basement levels, and that would then flood the whole of Manhattan. But that
Oh.
didn't happen. When
Mm.
they actually ended up bringing in the heavy equipment to start moving around the debris, the heavy earth moving equipment started causing damage to the bathtub. And later during the cleanup process, because right next to the North Tower, you had Building 6. Building 6 is the building that had that big round hole in the middle of it that looked like a cookie cutter or scooped out the middle of it. Now, when they wanted to bring that building down, the controlled demolition experts that were tasked with taking the remnants of buildings 4, 5, and 6 down, they were too afraid to use explosives in
Mhm.
fear of damaging the bathtub.
Mhm.
And everybody is well aware of the Lucky Larry Pullet video when talking about Building 7. Well, the real Pullet was Building 6 because they had to take that building down by attaching cables to it and physically pulling it down. That's the real Pullet of the World Trade Center, not Building 7. Building Seven's bullet of Larry Silverstein was something to push people down the controlled demolition of Building 7. And Building 7 did not go down due to fires or controlled demolition either.
Wait, so if they used a certain magnetic field for Twin Towers, the building 7, it came down, I think 6 hours later, seven
Yeah,
hours
20
later.
minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes past 5 the afternoon.
So, well, they used another magnetic field for the building 7, but they didn't use it for building 6.
I think I think they played around with various versions of whatever could do this destruction. Because if you look, a lot of people state, if you talk about Building 6, they think that's rubble that fell into it and that caused that damage. Unfortunately, if you look at the pictures of Building 6 that's available, they took pictures of the inside of that hole that you've seen. And it was empty. You didn't have the rubble there. So Building 7 was similar type tech, but more in line, if you can call it a microwave that you put your chicken on slow cook.
Mhm.
Because when the North Tower came down, the facade of the building had a huge gash in the middle of it. And on that side of the building for the whole day, there was what people perceived to be smoke billowing out of that building for the whole day. So it's like that building was slowly but surely during the course of the day, everything in that was basically turning into dust. And by the time it dropped down at 5:20 the afternoon. Only the outer shell of that building was basically left. And when it drops down, there are no explosions going off whatsoever. But if you look at the presentations that are given by the guys touting it was controlled demolition, they never play any audio on their videos. Never play audio. So again, remember
But the
the
audio
example.
is available? Audio is
Yes,
available?
I've
Okay.
got 10 videos that show that fell silently. There's even an interview that was being done with a nurse, and you can see Building 7 in the background. There are some buildings in the background that obscures part of Building 7, but it was towering over the other buildings. And she was talking about food and supplies that needs to be brought to the first responders, and then all of a sudden the building starts dropping, and the guy's like, whoa, 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 look at that, and she's like, what, and so
Oh, it was that
you would have
quiet.
heard it. You would have heard explosions.
There you go. Your name, ma'am?
Barbara Crowley,
Crowley.
NYU Medical Center.
Okay, tell me what you know.
All I know at this point is they're trying to establish an outdoor hospital facility like we've set up at Chelsea Piers, a
Like a
triage
triage.
unit for the personnel that are attending to the scene, not to the injured in the scene. They can't get in to get any casualties out at this time. They don't know the extent of it at this point. What we're doing now is going up to get medical supplies, to bring down trauma physicians down here, to set up the surgical unit and the triage unit down here, in addition to, if anybody out there can help, any vendors who have food or supplies. The firemen have no food, nothing but snacks. They need fluids, they need water, and they need protein foods. This is just the beginning of what they're facing. And we need masks. We need TB masks. Holy shit! What is it?
It just went down.
What just went down?
World Trade 7.
It did go down before.
No, 7. Number 7.
Oh my God!
Wow.
Then there's another angle also in that same street where there's a lot of people walking up and down, and when Building 7 goes down, nobody looks around, nobody looks back. So if a building was brought down with controlled demolition and explosions, like, they would turn around. But the guys who are trying to sell it to you that Building 7 went down like a controlled demolition, they never play the sound. They say, oh, those guys mentioned explosions going off the whole day, and this guy heard explosions going off. But again, then play the video and show us the explosions. And again, this brings us back to the example that I gave you with, I've got something in my hands, what is it? So you thought it's a cat. You think it's a controlled demolition because it looks similar and it's got similar characteristics. But if you're not given the correct information, you won't know what's going on. Because the biggest tell with regards to Building 7 is the seismic reading. Because again, remember, the Seattle Kingdom was 130,000 tons, and the Building 7 was 230,000 tons. So
Wait,
that's 100.
so can you say again?
So the Seattle Kingdom that left a 2.3 on the Richter scale
Yeah. Was how
was
many tons?
130,000 tons.
Okay. And
Building
a Twin
Building
Tower?
7
Building
was
7? Mm-hmm.
230,000 tons.
Okay, 100 tons more.
Okay, so what do you expect the seismic reading to be?
Well, then if 130 tons gave 2.3, then 230 would give, well, like around 3?
Okay, that's what you expect it to be with
Yeah.
PNS waves
With
if
that.
it's a controlled
With,
demolition.
yes.
Okay. So what was recorded?
What you
And
tell
what
me.
would you think if I tell you there was no SLP wave and the reading was 0.6?
Ooh, wow. Okay, 0.6. That's way
That's
less.
like a big truck or a jackhammer being used to drill a hole in the ground.
Okay, wait. So doesn't this mean that Twin Towers, like there was still, like, it was 2.3? Oh
But it
wait,
should
no,
have been
actually,
closer to four,
yeah.
or
But I'm
even more.
thinking maybe they used something else. But then, do you think so? Twin Towers and Building 6, sorry, Building 7, they had similar weapon or whatever used?
I think it's two different ones, because
Two
Building 7
different.
took the whole day, where the other buildings were
Yeah, but
supposedly burning for an hour. I think they can tweak the intensity or something like that. And the other aspect is, we haven't even talked about Building 4 yet. Building 4 was right next to the South Tower, the World Trade Center 2, right next to it. And that's the building where you see the top part tilting to the left. And when you would expect it to be dropping down to the ground and falling on top of something or whatever. But if you look at Building 4, 75% of that building was gone, level to the ground. No, it just disappeared, poof, gone. And then the basements under the towers and the bathtub and everything was not damaged. The basement itself was mostly undamaged. There are
mm,
first responders that say that most of the vehicles that were in the parking garages were driven out from there. There are videos of the guys walking around in the subway stations and the various floors, that you can see some damage, but it's not like the rubble of the two buildings fell into the towers, and that's why the people said, "Oh, why is there so little rubble?" That's also
hmm.
another straw man, or another um, perception management aspect that was brought out, because on the September 12th, those people were talking about why is there so little rubble, and on September 13th, the area was closed down for journalists, civilians, and they took over control of all the narratives coming out from Ground
Hmm.
Zero. So they could control the perception of what people are being told and keep it under wraps in that way.
Okay, so now I'm thinking they can. So this is this energy, so some sort of energy field that can be applied, and they can tweak it. They can use it in a different ways. It can cause different types of impact.
Yes.
So why? So I'm thinking because I know, like, for sure, when governments use terrorism as a like an excuse for certain things, right? So I know I self censor myself sometimes.
Yeah, in
So
Germany, got you.
no, not because of Germany, but because of
Oh,
where I'm from.
oh,
So I know. Okay, so I can say that I know there was a building, a skyscraper, right? Sort of not like twin towers, but like way less. So it was uh blown. Like there was a what is it? What do you call it? Terroristic act. A bomb was exploded, right? So and then they were like, oh, this is terrorists, and now the whole rhetoric changes, right? So people, if people were like questioning, why are we not getting, why are we paying so much taxes, or well, why is there so much corruption? Now it's different. Now there's going to be peace. Now we will be protecting you. So everybody was supposed to be grateful for the peace, that terrorists are
yes.
not coming in blowing things up. So we were poor, but we were like, okay, that's like, at least we're not like, we don't have to worry about things being blown up, right? So that was the thing. Another one was in Russia, for example. Like, it's just my intuition that just before Putin got elected, there were residential buildings that were like blown up, and one of the journalists who was actually doing his documentary, that video is on YouTube, he asks point blank Putin, like, did you do that? And he just looks at him, and there's like, you can see that he's like, what the f. So I think it helped him to get elected, because people are like, so he's strong, he can protect us, people. Obviously it's a psyop, right? But
Yeah.
in this case, if they wanted to start war in Afghanistan, right? What they didn't really have to go into such an elaborate scheme, and
But there was something else to the buildings as well, because round about a short while before that, the Twin Towers had a dirty secret. They initially, when they built them, they had a lot of asbestos in the buildings, And every time you've got a new tenant and they want to end up renovating and everything, you had to have these specialized people come in and remove all the asbestos.
Wait, what is it? Is it like mold? What is
No, no,
asbestos?
asbestos is a type of synthetic, like fiberglass type, something like that. And
Naturally
asbestos, if it
occurring?
comes in, yeah, yeah, and if it comes, no, not naturally occurring, it's stuff that people made. So if you inhale that, it damages your lungs and you can then die of cancer. That's why there were so many deaths in the first responders and everything, because all that asbestos and stuff was part of the dust.
Oh wait, like why did they use asbestos? Or was it not known
That's
that
just
it's
in the
dangerous?
olden days before they knew that it was bad
Uh,
for you. Because remember, the buildings
oh.
were built in the 60s.
Oh, okay, okay. So they
Yeah,
didn't know it was toxic, and
yeah,
now it was proven that it's toxic, so they don't know what
yeah.
to do
And
with it now.
precisely, and the buildings were filled with it. And at that stage, the Port Authority of New York that owned the buildings were in litigation with the insurance companies for 10 years, trying to get the insurance companies to pay for the renovations and the removal of the asbestos. And then they lost their 10-year case. And then all of a sudden, this Larry Silverstein comes in and he rents the Twin Towers for 99 years. And the year before he actually ended up renting them, the Twin Towers were valued at $1.2 billion. And the removal of asbestos for those two buildings would be more than what it initially was to build them. So here you've got two major problems. If even if you wanted to do a controlled demolition, like whenever any building becomes redundant, you still had to go in and remove the asbestos because you can't have it just floating around with a controlled demolition. So they were in a rock and a hard place. And then the following year, after they were valued at 1.2, when Larry took hold of it, they were all of a sudden valued at 3.4 billion. And lucky Larry ended up, I think, borrowing money somewhere. I think if it was 10 or $100 million or something like that, very small amount. And 6 weeks late, and then he took the extra terrorist insurance on the buildings. And 6 weeks later, the building is gone. He then goes to the insurance companies and tells them, look, each plane that hit the buildings is a separate terrorist attack on their own. And I think he got a payout, I think like $4 billion. And after he won that case, he went after the plane companies as well and got another couple of million out of them as well. So that's why they call him Lucky Larry. And he also owned Building 7. So that already tells you. And then you've got the story of him and his two children not going to the Twin Towers that day. And Lucky Larry would always have dinner at the top floor in the restaurant there with his tenants in the mornings. That was the first thing that he did. So there must have been some sort of foreknowledge, or he would have known somebody or something. You can only speculate about that. But
Yeah, but like,
coming,
if, let's say there's a military organization, right? And why would they help him out? Why would they actually say, okay, we have a secret weapon, we will go to all this extent and doing this such a large scale operation? Lots of people die, buildings dustify, and then the planes are like, and I think I also heard that on that day the airplanes, there was like a test that we didn't know where the airplanes went, all these things.
yes.
So this is massive preparation. Why would they do just to help him out with asbestos?
Well, maybe he's just friends with the right people, and they just decide, okay, we can use this guy as a front man. He'll be able to keep quiet and not ask the uncomfortable questions or anything like that. We won't really know how the perpetrators put
Hmm.
everything together. We know it wasn't something that was planned over a weekend, like 2 weeks before. And this
Hmm.
is something that has been coming on, if you can really say, for decades.
Okay, if it's for decades, then it means that he himself found out later. Otherwise, he would have gone those insurances way before. Because the fact
Yeah,
that
but
he got them very close to the incident means that he found out later. Otherwise, it's because it's suspicious, right? He would
Yeah,
not want to be suspected.
yeah. If I can remember, in one of his interviews, and it's under correction, I think he mentioned something about somebody calling him up the day and say, "Wouldn't it be nice if you owned the Twin Towers?" or something to that effect. And he said, "Oh well, it's two wonderful big buildings. Why not?" And
Yeah,
then
I
it
don't think
was.
things just happen like that, right?
So
Like you just
I don't know.
somebody
I
calls
don't
you
know.
up and you're like, "Well, I'm gonna spend like
Well, I'm
millions
the
and
I'm
dollars to
the
buy." Okay,
Well,
so
I'm the at that stage the guy was owning, I think, like 7,000 square meters of or more than that, a hell of a lot of real estate in Lower Manhattan. That is some of the most prized real estate in America, if you can call it that. So, and a lot of
okay,
money to be made. So
yeah. So I'm
money.
thinking then. So the military, this people, they were planning it for decades, with the aim of, I guess, to see because you can test on small things, I guess, but then if you want to kind of actually see in real time, like how such a gigantic building can turn into dust, maybe there was elements of just to having some proof for this technology, and then
Or
they
by or to send a message
to
to
who?
other people in the know of such technology, saying, "Here's ours. We've
Oh,
perfected it."
to Russia or
And
to China. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's
that
good.
was a presentation of what they
Yeah,
can do, and that is
yeah, yeah.
something seriously scary.
Yeah. So then, okay. So yeah, because the historically United States is like Cold War and all this. Who's the better? We can go to the moon. You blah blah blah. Okay. All right. So that's good. Then they were trying to send a message, and then at the same time, so the second bird would be starting the war in Afghanistan and
20
lots of
year
money
fake
laundering.
war.
Okay.
Because remember, there's a lot of money being made on both sides of a war always.
True,
And
yeah.
at that
When there's
stage,
war, there's money laundering going on, of
yeah,
course. So,
yeah.
and also there's a like I'm thinking if he is somehow involved in, but then they don't need the money, do they? I'm thinking like did he have to share the money that he got from the insurance with
No,
this?
remember, he rebuilt all those buildings. So he's once the World Trade Center has been rebuilt, and he's got his new tenants and all of that. That's where he makes his money. And all of a sudden, he's built two new buildings, and there's no problems with asbestos. All the cost that it'll be to refurbish stuff that the Port Authority was trying to get out of for 10 years.
Okay, so
So
this is just a
everybody
lot of
won.
yeah, everybody wants. So when you are trying to do something, you're gonna take into account things like on daily life. Like I'm like, okay, so I have to pick up my kids and I have to drop off to the. So I try to make it as efficient, productive as possible. Okay, so if I'm having this, why don't I invite some other friends so that we can all benefit from whatever. So you always have these things, but this is like in way more gigantic like scale.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then the thing is that people don't realize is this technology that was used there, because that's the other aspect that people come in with when it's directed energy weapon. But what is the energy source? Where do you get enough energy to basically do that? And this is where you need to do a little bit of research on cold fusion, because cold fusion is a way of freeing us all of all the dirty energies that we are currently using. Because with cold fusion, you put in very little energy to get the process going, and what you get out of it is 100 times more. And it's on this principle that this technology that was used, this, you can call it a free energy technology that was used to disintegrate these towers, was used. Now, instead of using it for a destructive purpose, if we expose the crime, we also expose this technology. And that's what Dr. Wood wanted to do when she went to NIST and did a request for correction and her court case. Because if she was successful and not railroaded by the courts in America, because by now we've seen with Dodge and everything now this year how corrupt the judicial system in America is. then she could have deposed these military companies who specialize in these kind of stuff, and they could have said who's got it, or who did it, or who pressed the button the morning. And instead of that basically happening, and the 9/11 Truth Movement and that organizations rallying behind her, what did they do? They went and smeared her and told her, "You're a kook. There's no way something like this can work. It doesn't matter what evidence you bring or whatever, because it's unattainable." And that is something that is really disheartening, because imagine enough of a fuss was made about this in 2007 when she went to court, and there was enough pressure. There was thousands of people outside the courtroom chanting and everything. Where could this have ended up? We could now possibly have this technology in each of our homes and never pay to switch on a light, never pay a gas bill, never pay for putting fuel in your car, never have an electric car that needs to be plugged in and recharged. And this is cold fusion. And cold fusion was already suppressed in 1989 by Stephen E. Jones, who worked for the Department of Energy and rocked up in the 9/11 Truth Movement 15 years later, marginalizing the evidence that Dr. Wood was presenting and stating, no, but she's talking about Jewish space lasers or something. And he was trying to sell people off on thermite, which is that is provable as not usable to bring a building down. So there's a lot of politics. And if you want to get behind the politics that came in 2005, when the Truth Movement was just started and formalized under James Fetzer and Stephen E. Jones in 2005, you've got to read Andrew Johnson's two books, 9/11 Finding the Truth and 9/11 Holding the Truth, which is free downloadable books off his website, checktheevidence.com. You can get it in paperback if you want, but it's free downloadable ebooks, which chronicles all of this infighting and all the straw manning that's been going on all these years.
Right.
So
I
the
think like
information is out there.
yeah, I think at this point we've learned a lot, and every time when somebody is being smeared, we have to question. There's
Yeah,
scrutiny needs to be applied, because that's one of the like red flags. When somebody's being smeared, then you need to like really look into it. Is it for real or not? And this is annoying, because what they do is they use all these labels, and those words, they lose their meaning, and then it's like crying wolf, I think it's called. Like
yeah,
if you call somebody falsely like a racist or misogynist, or like in this case like what she called, and then when it's a real case, people will not believe it. That's why I'm annoyed. Like every time we use a word, we need to be feel the responsibility and use it in real cases, and not just because we want to push a certain agenda.
and mainly the words are used to shut down debate or discussions of a subject, because I see this on a daily basis, and there was a concerted effort put out there to marginalize Dr. Wood and Dr. Morgan Reynolds, who had the issues with the flight impacts at the towers. And they were ostracized. Even now, even if you want to go on, you can go try and create a Wikipedia page on Dr. Wood, and it gets taken down. There is no mention allowed of Dr. Wood or the evidence she presents on Wikipedia, and it's well documented with screenshots where they mentioned to a gentleman when he was trying to get it done, where they said she's on a block list, a person non grata, no mention of her can be made. But you can talk about any other crazy conspiracy theory on 9/11, but talk about Dr. Wood, not allowed.
Hmm. That also should be like a sign. Why
Yeah.
is this happening? And then that should like do the opposite reaction. People should now be like, okay, so if they are doing this, I'm going to be laser focused on what they're trying to hide. So that should be like the attitude, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything. Is there anything that you think that we missed?
Well, there's still a lot that we can go into. We can discuss what the issues are at the Pentagon. We can discuss what the issues are at Shanksville. We haven't gotten into the weird and wonderful 1,400 toasted cars, what the problems are there.
I have no clue how we're gonna go move forward, and I don't even know what's gonna come out of it if everyone knows what happened to these twin towers. But I think we still need to. It helps. It helps because we're not gonna believe next time when some psyop like this is gonna happen. We
Yeah,
will be really cautious. We'll apply critical thinking and 9/11, COVID, the pandemic. I really hope that if we know the truth next time they will not be able to do it on such a massive
yeah,
scale. They will not be able to psyop us in such a massive scale. That's my hope.
precisely. Yeah, if more people understood 9/11, then maybe COVID wouldn't have happened. And that is also one statement that Dr. Wood said is, if you read this book, it's basically a course in critical thinking, because when COVID happened, I saw, okay, this is a psyop coming. I didn't comply with anything whatsoever. And luckily with us in South Africa, we've got a failed state. So I could walk around and not be arrested at my home because I did hurt somebody's feelings online or anything like that. So I didn't wear my face nappy. I was pulled off in roadblocks with all the cops with their face nappies on, and I wasn't wearing it. So yeah, it's about taking back your freedom, knowing what's going on, and then basically learning how to see the signs, and that's all we can do. Hopefully, more and more people will start waking up, and that is something that we should actually say thank you for COVID, because that has shaken up a lot of people and it had them wake up. And they are now basically stating, okay, well, if they could fool us so easily with COVID, what else did they do? And people will slowly work back, and they will get to 9/11, and they will work back even more, because these psyops have been going on for a very long time.
That's true. It's like they say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. I don't know what
Yeah,
it was, but
yeah. But they put on a banner over there, never forget. And that banner that was put on there was basically to reinforce the trauma.
oh.
Forget what? They didn't tell us
Mm.
what happened or anything like that, but that was an emotional play on the trauma of that day, and there was no solution. So these guys that planned it had all these angles ready. They knew people were going to ask questions, and they made sure that they had these little Easter eggs ready to have people run down. All
Yeah.
except of looking at all the evidence and then stepping back and saying, what does the evidence tell us? And people need to do that more, instead of just jumping to conclusions and trying to find narratives that fit to those points. Just always don't jump headlong into anything that's happening. Take a moment or two, assess the situation, and then decide